Welcome to the DFS build for the two-game NBA slate starting tonight on Thursday and going into Friday. I'm going to actually keep this video pretty short because a lot of the stuff I broke down for today's showdown slate can just be checked out at the showdown video before tonight's game. And then you can just pay attention to the Mavs Timberwolves stuff after. The only thing is we don't have ownership projections for that second game yet. And I mean, if they come out, it's going to be later. So, we're just going to go over it and look at the plays that look good. And then I think just as usual, as I've always said, you can play the ownership game where you try to leverage ownership to a certain degree. But honestly, like the chalky stuff has been hitting lately. I made a point to say yesterday that if McDaniels was actually really not that owned compared to Naz Reid. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be on the McDaniels side again, even though I didn't really feel like what he'd been doing was sustainable. And he crushed again. Naz Reid was also still pretty good. So he was fine chalk, but McDaniels was the play for sure between the two. And then a couple slates ago, I was not very into Drew Holiday as a chalky option. And of course, he got like 54 fantasy points. So that's how it goes sometimes. You can't fade every chalky option, obviously, nor should you. Obviously, there's a lot of good chalk, but you also can't play every chalky option. Whether you're doing a single entry lineup or you're doing a lot of lineups, you either need to fade somebody who's chalky or several options that are chalky, or you need to be underweight on them to a certain degree. And then, how that shakes out is going to define your night and decide if you win money or not. So, for instance, a couple days ago for the Celtics showdown slate, I was very underweight on Drew Holiday. And the only lineups that I had that did anything were, of course, the ones that had Drew Holiday in the captain slot, and that was mostly thanks to the DFS Hero optimizer, and it got him there. It got him in there for me, and I wasn't really very interested in getting to him at all because he was going to be owned. So, just something to think about. Speaking of which, I'll be using DFS Hero projections and the boom rating and stuff like that, but we can't pay too much attention to optimal lineup percentage or user ownership projections just yet because this is really just looking at the first game only. So we're just going to break it down and look at just the best overall plays and everything. That said, you can use them and wait till the projections update and use them at your own leisure, and then go from there. You can, if you hit the link below this video, you can get a 50% discount to try them out. If this video helps you out in any way, please give it a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Both of those things help me out a lot, help me know that I'm doing something right and helping you out, and helps the community grow and all that. So it's always good stuff to do. All right, let's get right into it. I don't want to talk too much about the first game because, like I said, you can go check out the showdown video at the end of this video or go to the channel. It'll be on there and you can get it. But let's just go over this because the prices are obviously different for a two-game slate, and a two-game slate is different than a showdown slate. So on the Pacers side, Tyrese Haliburton, basically every Pacers guy and every Celtics guy did really well in game one because the game went into overtime. The Pacers are going to push the pace naturally, right? They're going to run fast. They're going to try to put a lot of points up, try to get Boston tired. It's not really going to work that well because Boston does not mind playing fast, and they adjust pretty well. But in game one, pretty much everybody worked out. So we're just going to look at pricing and see who really stands out at this point. Tyrese Haliburton's price has come down, so I'm very interested in Tyrese Haliburton. Obviously, you see here his ownership is at 55%. Can't believe that because we don't know the ownership yet for the other game, so that's irrelevant. But he does have a nice 21% boom rating at DFS Hero. So we know he has a ceiling. We know he's a good permanent guy. He's literally the best permanent guy the Pacers have, and now he's a little bit too cheap, in my opinion. So there's always the risk that this game blows out. This is 8.5 point spread, but it does have a 225 total, which is by far the best of the two games. So, it just beats it out by like 18 points or something. And just the pace of play is better for this game too. So this is definitely the game that feels a little bit better as far as DFS environment goes. The question is, can the Pacers keep it close for a second game in a row? Worth noting that in the prior two series, Boston had a really tough time at keeping their opponent in check in game twos. But it kind of feels like that game already happened in game one. So I do expect Boston to kind of adjust a little bit and hold the Pacers a little bit more in check. But two games, so I still think we should have interest in some of these guys just because Haliburton is a really nice price and he projects well and he has a ceiling. So I still have interest in Haliburton for sure. Siakam is one of my favorite plays for the showdown slate. And I don't have a problem with him here either. He doesn't project as well as Haliburton, but he's 800 cheaper. He's really not that far away from him. 18% boom rating is just okay. We know he has a bit of a ceiling. He had 50-plus fantasy points in game one. Boston gave up some good games to Evan Mobley in their previous series. So it's definitely a spot where Siakam can have success if he's hitting his shots. And perhaps no Porzingis has, allowed him to get some more rebounds because he had 12 rebounds in game one too. So Siakam looks good at 7.5. Are Haliburton and Siakam core plays? No, but they are really, really solid plays. And for me, it's going to depend on ownership. If those guys are low owned, I'm going to be very interested in them. Miles Turner stands out as the best play for the Pacers, though. He's not that far off in projection from Siakam, and he's $900 cheaper. So he looks really good. He's going to be pretty chalky. He's a borderline core play for me, depending on where the ownership lands. He had 46 fantasy points in game one. He's really just been rock solid throughout the playoffs. He's been very efficient. And even if he's not going to be blowing up as a scorer, we know he can get blocks and rebounds, and he can hit threes. So he doesn't need to go crazy and score 20-plus real points every time out there. He can do other things with peripheral stats and pay off. So at 6.6K, he's a bit too cheap for me. He's my favorite spend up for the Pacers for sure. As we go down, the rest of the Pacers are just good value. TJ McConnell is a little bit tough to trust on a case-by-case basis just because he only plays about 20 to maybe 25 minutes per game off the bench. Really good permanent guy. So if we're looking just at ceiling and permanent production, I do prefer TJ McConnell over Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith, but they're all the same price. They all project about the same. McConnell's probably going to carry more ownership, and he's going to play less. So where the ownership lands is what's going to decide what I do with McConnell as far as if I'm going to be underweight or overweight, because I don't really love the idea of committing to what could be a chalkier McConnell if he's for sure going to play like 5 or even 10 minutes fewer than Nembhard or Nesmith. If the game stays close and those two dudes avoid foul trouble, they're going to play 35 to 38 minutes, and McConnell is not. So if McConnell is not crushing, then that could be a really easy way to gain leverage on the field because those guys are good plays too. And Aaron Nesmith is actually cheaper than both of them. So right now, he would probably be the guy I'd roll with. He's just below McConnell on the projection, just above Nembhard. And he plays a lot of minutes as long as he isn't in too much foul trouble. So all three are very, very viable. It's not a mega hard lean. Like it's not like I'm going Aaron Nesmith to the moon, but I just think as far as where the price is at and where ownership might end up being, I think Nesmith is my favorite play there. Obi Toppin continues to get 15 to 20 minutes off the bench at 4K. He looks like really, really good value. He's probably my favorite value play for the Pacers. On this 2-game slate. He's one of my favorite value plays on the showdown slate as well. So, we just know he's going to push for about 20 minutes. And if he's hitting the shots, he might play more. So I like him a good deal. I definitely like him more on this 2-game slate than on the showdown slate, just because he helps us open things up more to get, higher price guys if we want to with a second game in mind. And then there's also Ben Shepherd and Isaiah Jackson. I'm not really into Isaiah Jackson just because his minutes have come down. So if we feel good about that changing 3K flat for Isaiah Jackson, he is a good permanent guy. We could take that gamble. I'm a lot more inclined to take that risk in a showdown slate. If where I'm rolling out a ton of lineups and just like, you really don't have much room for error. So if you can get a really, really cheap Isaiah Jackson and he pays off, then that could be big. For a 2-game slate, I think Isaiah Jackson might be stretching a bit too thin, just because where his role is gone now. So unless we know he's going to be back out there getting 10-plus minutes, I don't really love it. Ben Shepherd is not a good permanent guy, but he is getting run. He had 17 minutes in game one of the series. He's had 17-plus minutes in almost every game in the playoffs. So he has a role off the bench. He needs to hit some shots to pay off, but at 3.2K, I think that's a gamble we can take if we want to. And I definitely prefer him over Isaiah Jackson. So cue the Isaiah Jackson 40 burger for sure. But yeah, so that does it for Indiana. Over to Boston we go. Obviously up top, Tatum looks awesome. 56-point fantasy projection, 38% boom rating. He is certainly going to be in the optimal quite a bit just because, his price has finally come up to 10K. He had been under 10K for forever. If I go look at his DraftKings log, he wasn't 10K since April 1st. So he has always had the ceiling and floor to demand that price tag. But finally he's there. And with us on a slate with Luka and Anthony Edwards, it's nice to see that price go up. So maybe, just maybe, his ownership will dip a little bit because of that. I don't know. I do know, though, he has exhibited a nice ceiling and it's been really consistent. 4 straight 60-plus fantasy point efforts. So at home in this soft matchup, I don't really see much reason to expect that to change. With Porzingis still out, I think there's enough usage to go around to feel pretty good about any Boston play that you want. So Tatum very much remains in play as a top spend, and it's just going to come down to ownership for me. Jaylen Brown at 8.1K is too cheap. He looks like a pretty good leverage play on Tatum if Tatum is chalky. There are these instances where, especially with Boston, with a team that is loaded with so many guys who can do damage, there are times where Tatum will just take the backseat to Jaylen Brown, and Jaylen Brown is just en fuego, and he'll just go off, and they'll ride Jaylen Brown. So this could certainly be a game like that. It's not like Jaylen Brown was bad in the first game. He had 49 fantasy points in overtime. Surely he hit that game-tying 3 to send it to OT as well. So nothing to dislike about Jaylen Brown. Really nice 43-point fantasy projection, 26% boom rating. You can certainly play him with Tatum as well if you want to fire up a bunch of Celtics. They have the best matchup of the slate. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just going to be an ownership thing for me. We got to see what the actual ownership is, and hopefully we get that in a few hours. Derek White still looks good at 6.8K. Decent projection at almost 35 points, 20% boom rating. He is going to be an ownership thing for me too. I like that. I think the price is good. I'm just very interested to see if the ownership is going to flock to Drew after that insane game and what is left over for Derek White. Once again, I'm going to die on this hill. I'm going to die on the hill of Drew Holiday is not a high usage guy, and they have other guys. They have other mouths to feed here. He did play like the entire game. He played 48 minutes, and he went nuclear, 28 real points, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, 3 steals, 54 fantasy points, 10 for 16 shooting. I don't know how much longer he can maintain this this production, this efficiency. It's got to end soon. So if he's mega chalk, I am once again going to be very underweight. Having said that, there's no denying that he has a great price, and there's no denying that he has been playing really well. And he's coming off an insane outing. So if you just want to roll with Drew and just say, hey, here we go, this is who he is now, then you can do that. But if he's going to be chalky, I will gladly go away from him. Al Horford at 5.7K did come back down to earth a little bit with 31 fantasy points in his last game. But if he can do that at that price, I will gladly take it. 30 to 35 fantasy points, that's a great spot for a 5.7K Horford. No issues there. If you think the game is going to blow out, then you can look at Luke Cornett or Sam Hauser, and of course Peyton Pritchard. Peyton Pritchard's the only one that looks pretty good no matter what, so he's the only one I really want to play at 3.9K. He's a little bit too cheap for a guy who's going to get 21 plus minutes in this matchup, and if the game goes south, he probably will end up closing. So Pritchard looks really, really good to me. All right, moving along to Dallas and Minnesota. We do have projections. We just don't have ownership projections. So we can look at that. Obviously, Luka is going to lead the way with a 55-point fantasy projection. Is he the number 1 projection on the slate? No, he's actually below Tatum. So that will be interesting to see. Could we get monster leverage right away by fading Tatum, leveraging Tatum with Jaylen Brown, and then also leveraging it with Luka at a similar projection? Maybe. At this point, Luka is only 1,000 more than Tatum. So if the ownership if there's a wide gap at ownership, I'll be very, very interested in Luka. Obviously, this game is in Minnesota. The Timberwolves are very good defensively. They're going to be very hungry to win after losing game 1. So I don't think Luka is a must at all. I just think anytime Luka is even remotely low owned, he's very interesting. So that'll be the way I look at Luka on this 2-game slate. I do not think he's an absolute must. In game 1, he had 60 fantasy points. I mean, he's just doing this every time. He's getting 56 to 67 fantasy points. That's what he's been doing every playoff game, basically. I mean, we have not seen that epic 80, 90 point ceiling that he can do. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when that actually arrives. If you want to pay up for Luka, you can do that. I'm going to look at it from an ownership perspective for sure. I will say I went into the Mavs showdown slate last time, and I said, look out for Kyrie Irving to have a good game. He had been very, very quiet. He had 3 straight games with 29 or fewer fantasy points, and he finally popped off 30 real points, 43 fantasy points. Unfortunately, I didn't get him in the captain enough, and I really didn't get to him enough overall. And of course, Jaden McDaniels once again made my life miserable. But yeah, Kyrie Irving once again, 7.7K. His price has only come down. Not a good matchup with Mike Conley, but maybe he's dialed in for this series, and this is who he's going to be. If so, he's way too cheap. So I really like Irving. I like him even more so if I'm not paying for Luka, and I like him even more than that if Luka ends up being somewhat chalky and he could be a leverage play in him. I don't think that's going to be the case though. I think Luka's going to be pretty low owned. And I think Kyrie's going to be chalky because his price is too cheap and obviously recency bias in the last game. So that could be another play we do. You can still play Tatum and then maybe go get Luka, who would be possibly low owned compared to Kyrie. We don't know the ownership yet, but that is one thing to consider. PJ Washington at 6.5 is a rock solid price. He is getting loads of minutes. He played 37 plus minutes in 4 of his last 5 games. He hasn't really blown up as a scorer in any of his last 3 outings, but when he does, he's going to smash this price tag. I think he's priced up enough that we don't have to prioritize him, especially on a slate where you do have Drew, you do have Miles Turner, you do have Derek White. So I don't think he's a must, but he is definitely an interesting tournament play, especially if he's going to be low owned. Derek Lively smashed in the last game, 27 minutes, 30 fantasy points. He had 39 fantasy points the game before that. He has been doing really well, actually. And he actually specifically rebounded well against Rudy Gobert down low. So at 4.9K, I like him a lot. Daniel Gafford at 4.5K is still in play and interesting. I think that's another thing where we could entertain an ownership flip just because Gafford is cheaper and they project pretty close. So you could bank on, a chalkier Lively not meeting expectations, and Gafford ends up, just being the much better play. So I do like Lively better in a vacuum, but if the ownership is very, very slanted towards Lively, I think I would probably be a little bit overweight on Gafford. And I think you can pair them together if you want to. I just think, usually when you're looking at big men, they can kind of cut into each other's production. There's not like a direct correlation there. Just like it's like I don't love playing big men from the same team together that much, because if one guy is getting all the rebounds and blocks and interior scoring, what's the other guy doing, right? I mean, if the other guy is able to shoot threes and is an explosive scorer outside of all that, I think it's viable, but it's just something that I consider when, building out my lineups for sure. But they're so cheap that I don't think it really matters that much for this slate specifically. Derek Jones Jr. at 4.7K, just a fine value right there with Lively and Gafford. He is coming in with the third best projection of that trio, though. That will probably dip his ownership. So if he's going to be the lowest owned option of that trio, that would make me like him a little bit more. He came back down to earth a little bit in the last game with just 16 fantasy points. He had 27 plus in each of his previous 3 games. So maybe people are down on him a little bit. I wouldn't get out on him too quickly because he did play 35 minutes in game 1 and they're going to need him. So maybe he hits some more shots and gets some blocks and stuff and ends up crushing. I mean, he's only 4.6 or 4.7K. So I have no issue with doing that. I probably would play 2 of these guys. And right now, because of where I feel like ownership is going to go, I would probably go with Lively and Derek Jones Jr. and leave Gafford there just because Lively has been playing better. You can also look at Tim Hardaway Jr. if you want a big punt at 3.3K. He just is not doing it, man. He is not getting it done. He's not hitting any shots. In fact, in 10 minutes in game 1, he took 0 shots. So he is not really on my radar as far as a guy that I feel like I can trust. I would very much rather go with Ben Shepherd or even just pay $600 more and go get Peyton Pritchard. That said, he got 10 minutes last game. He has been getting 10 to 15 minutes, if not more, off the bench in other games. So if he just comes in and starts hitting some damn shots at 3.2K or 3.3K, Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to look pretty darn good all of a sudden. Maxi Kleber, nope, he's not. Doesn't really seem like he's back. Yeah, he could be back. I don't know. His status is uncertain. If he returns, that could obviously have an impact on the rotation. I would just keep an eye on what happens there. Assuming he's out, Josh Green going to get about 15 minutes. He's viable, but has not exhibited much of a ceiling. Not really a great per minute guy either. Jaden Hardy continued to get a little bit of run. He had 9 minutes last game, 11 fantasy points. more of like a showdown slate guy to throw in at the bottom if you want to play the Dallas Minnesota showdown slate tomorrow, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. I think he's fine at 3K if just because it's a 2-game slate if you want to go there. But again, I would feel a lot better about Ben Shepherd, and I'd rather just pay up for like Peyton Pritchard. And if that means I can't get like another major stud, so be it. All right, over to the Minnesota side we go. Anthony Edwards continues to look great. In game 1, he had 51 fantasy points, even though he wasn't scoring, which was nice to see. So I fully expect him to get going as a scorer in a really crucial game 2 at home. He hasn't scored more than 27 points in each of the last 4 games, and he's only topped 19 points one time in that span. So he's struggling a bit as a scorer. All those Michael Jordan comparisons are coming back to haunt him, it seems. But I think he's going to snap out of it. So I would expect Edwards to have a really big game. So I like him a lot, 9.6K. Depending on ownership, he looks like a very, very nice pivot away from what could be a chalky Jason Tatum. So I like that a lot. And then, of course, if Luka ends up being really owned, decent play on the other side to leverage against Luka. So yeah, no problem with Anthony Edwards. Good price. I feel like the field's going to look at him as being overpriced because he just hasn't been that dude in the last 4 games. But we know he can be. So sometimes in DFS, it's not about what you've been doing. It's what you can do. Honestly, a lot of times it's about that. That's why they talk about recency bias and hot and cold streaks and all that stuff. It's tough to predict when it's going to happen for sure. Otherwise, we'd all be winning every single night. But we have to, do our exposures and build our lineups and look at slates in that way to give ourselves a chance to hit on, players that we otherwise wouldn't really want to be on. So if we're only looking at the last 4 games, do we want to pay 9.6K for Anthony Edwards? No, we don't. If we're only looking at the last few games, would we ever fade Drew Holiday or Jaden McDaniels? No, of course not. But we have to think about the fact that these guys are real people. And when you factor in ownership, especially, maybe shit doesn't go the way we think it's going to go, right? So I would be over on Anthony Edwards for sure if he's low owned, and perhaps even if he's not. Cat continues to be a good play at 7.4K. Solid 39-point fantasy projection and a 28% boom rating, best boom rating of the Timberwolves. I like him just fine at 7.4K. He's been a little bit lacking of a ceiling. He had a 47-point fantasy game in the last game against Denver, but that was his only game over 41 fantasy points since game 2 against Denver. So we know he does have a ceiling, and he's really too cheap for his talent level. And he's another guy I would anticipate bounces back a bit and has a bigger game. Still, if you're going to look at him or Rudy Gobert, you're saving $1,000 in salary with Rudy Gobert, who plays just as much, is a double-double threat, can go crazy with blocks, and he just has a nice built-in floor. So I prefer Rudy. Obviously, he doesn't have the upside as a scorer that Cat does. He can't hit threes. But Rudy at 6.4K is really, really tough for me to ignore. So I like Rudy quite a bit. He's a borderline core play for me. 35-point fantasy projection, 27% boom rating. He's not that far behind Towns, but you save a ton of money. So another one to just monitor the ownership to see, if Cat's going to be mega owned and nobody wants Rudy, that's an easier call for me. But yeah, I like him better than Cat, but both are very, very fine plays. Once again, Mike Conley at 5.8K. He's okay. There's nothing wrong with him. But like I said, going into game 1, what's he going to get me? Maybe 30 fantasy points if he has a great game. He had 18 fantasy points in game 1. He's really out there for his defense. So I'm just not – if he's not looking for a shot, it just doesn't feel like a guy I really want to click on. As the last guy in at 5.8K, you could do worse, but just not somebody who I really want to race to. Good Lord, Jaden McDaniels. What to do with Jaden McDaniels? I don't know, man. 3 straight games of 21-plus real points, 3 straight games of 35-plus fantasy points. He plays the entire game, and he's hitting freaking everything right now. In my opinion, though, this is the Drew Holiday thing. This is not going to continue. This is not going to keep up forever. At some point, everybody eating the Jaden McDaniels chalk is going to get hurt badly. I don't know if it's going to be this game or not. I just know that I'm going to be underweight on him if he's chalky because this dude cannot keep this up. That said, 5.2K for a guy who's going to push for 40 freaking minutes and is in a hot streak right now is obviously nice. There's nothing wrong with Jaden McDaniels. It's going to be an ownership play for me, and the fact that I just don't think he's going to hit every damn shot he takes for a 4th consecutive game. That's just what I think. So I do expect, because he's been on fire, I do expect the ownership to flip. So Naz Reid at 4.4K could be at lower owned than he has been. He's been just really solid for that price point. 22 plus fantasy points in each of his last 3 games, 28 fantasy points in game 1. So I think this is a matchup he can have success in off the bench. Even better if he ends up closing, because they've done that before with all their 3 massive dudes closing together. Whether he does or not, though, 4.4K for Naz Reid is pretty appealing. I like that. Kyle Anderson at 3.1K. He had 17 minutes last game. If we can believe he's going to play 15 plus minutes, 3.1K is too cheap. I don't like it because he's Kyle Anderson and his minutes have been like all over the place. But if he's actually going to be out there and play that much, Kyle Anderson at 3.1K is probably my favorite value / punt of this entire 2-game slate. Naw at 3.5K. His minutes have dipped down. He's only at 16 or so minutes over the last 3 games, and it's equated to literally like 19 total fantasy points. So he's not hitting his shots, and he's losing minutes because of it. So unless like Mike Conley, who's like been questionable for many games in a row, unless he's randomly out, I don't really have much interest in Naw. More of a showdown slate play, if you ask me. And honestly, if he's not going to be playing well, maybe that just ends up being more run for Kyle Anderson. That said, he is still getting like 16 minutes. So if we can bank on him getting 16 plus minutes and he's not going to be owned because he's been terrible, he's still in play. I just don't feel really good about him because he seems to be just totally struggling at the moment. All right, that's going to do it for me. There's really not much further we can take it until we have ownership. We can feel a little bit better about our calls. So yeah, hopefully this helps you. I would look at ownership and try to take what I've said and kind of manipulate that and apply it to whatever lineup tool you use. If you haven't tried DFS Hero yet, give it a shot. 15% off discount if you hit the link below. Please give this video a like if I helped you in any way, and also consider subscribing to the channel. Good. Oh, and by the way, at the end of this, you can catch the showdown video if you haven't caught it already. All right, thanks for tuning in, and good luck.